Oh, come, little children, oh, come, one and all. Oh, come to the manger in Bethlehem's home, and see the Lord Jesus asleep on the hay. The little Lord Jesus was born Christmas Day. He lies in the manger, the hay is his bed. The star high in heaven shines over his head, and Mary and Joseph look down on the boy, while shepherds and wise men kneel down in their joy. Now glory to God, comes a song from on high, and peace for all peoples, we sing in reply. Then come, little children, rejoice all the way, for Jesus, the Christ child, was born Christmas Day. Oh, come, little children, oh, come, one and all.
In that region, there were lands that belonged to the leading man of the island. His name was Publius. He welcomed us and entertained us courteously for 3 days. Now it came about that Publius's father was afflicted with a recurrent fever and dysentery. So Paul went to see him, and after he had prayed, he laid his hands on him and healed him. Once this had happened, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases began coming to Paul and becoming cured. And so they honored us all with many marks of respect. And when we were finally setting sail again, they supplied us with all we needed. Okay, I get to tell you what's going on in the book of Acts because I dropped you into the middle of a long story. In fact, 20th chapter, we're right near the end. So one of the very important people in the first century of Christianity was a guy named Paul. His Hebrew name is Saul, and his Gentile name, his Roman name was Paul. Paul was a Jew, and now I do mean that in the religious sense because he was not a Judean, though his sister lived in Jerusalem, and it's possible that at least at some point Paul lived in Jerusalem as well. He was a Pharisee, studied predominantly under a guy named Gamaliel. He was a up-and-coming religious leader, and he saw his political opportunity in the persecution of the early Christians, which that lasted for a while until God got a hand on him. Shook him up, slapped him around a little bit, threw him on the ground. You know, what God does sometimes. And Paul had that wake-up call and realized that he was fighting against what he actually knew to be God's work. And so he converted and went from being the big enemy to the work of God to being one of the chief apostles. The word apostle means one who is sent, going everywhere. And early on, he wasn't very good at that job. We do have to be honest about that. He was not very good at that job. He was so bad at sharing the good news about Jesus that instead of it sounding like good news, it became a reason for people to want to kill him. Later on, that when the controversies around whether or not Jesus was in fact Messiah had reached a kind of fever pitch, and so that anybody who even brought up the name of Jesus, that was just start a riot, especially in the synagogues and the Jewish communities. At that point, Paul was just, he'd come back, he'd been out into the Gentile world, you know, talking to Gentiles, helping Gentiles come to know Jesus, and he'd come back to Jerusalem, and he was in the temple praying, minding his own business, and they were all like, "You're that Paul guy." And, of course, Paul was not known for being shy, so he said, "Sure," and they were like, "What kind of heresy and blasphemy are you teaching?" And he said, "Oh, no, not at all. I'm just telling everyone that Jesus is Messiah," you know, and then the riot starts. And that led to a trial, which led to another riot, which led to him being taken into custody by the Romans, which led to the Romans shipping him off from Jerusalem over to the provincial capital of Caesarea, where he was, and I didn't mention this last week, because if you're here, we talked about last week, we were talking about his presentation, his telling his story in front of the Roman proconsul Festus and King Herod Agrippa II and Herod's sister Berenice. What I didn't mention to you was he'd actually been there in Caesarea for 2 years, because the guy who preceded Festus had thought to himself, maybe Paul will bribe me to let him go. So he would bring Paul, he would keep Paul in jail, and he would call him frequently, and he'd talk with him and try to get information about him, but he was always sort of like, you know, there's a lot of expense involved in these trials, and you could just save us the money if you would just pay for all of the things that have happened so far. At least that's how Luke describes it. He was trying to get a bribe. When he was replaced by Festus, Festus was actually apparently a decent governor. And so Festus's approach was he actually sat Paul down, tried to figure out what was going on, didn't know, drags Paul in, but because he's a Roman, so he didn't get the Jewish stuff. And he didn't understand that this was an internal Jewish conversation about the nature of somebody who was named Joshua, but he didn't get the rest of it. King Herod Agrippa II, who was the last of the nominally Jewish kings, and his sister Berenice in particular was very knowledgeable. She was Jewish and was very knowledgeable about stuff. Herod was Jewish in that way in which you ask somebody who hasn't been to church in about 15 or 20 years, what religion are you? And they say, well, you know, I'm Methodist. So Festus brings Paul in front of them. But before that had happened, before they'd arrived, Festus had said to Paul, you know, he'd actually said to Paul, he said, listen, I don't get this stuff, so I don't have any idea what to do. And Paul had said, look, I'm a Roman citizen. I have a right to face my accuser. Where are my accusers? And Festus is like, yeah, I don't know. Okay, I'm the new guy here. I don't know what's going on. But I could send you back to Jerusalem, and they could just take care of it there. Paul thought to himself, not a good idea. So he said, well, I'm a Roman citizen, so I'm going to appeal to have my case heard by Caesar, which was a right that a Roman citizen had. So it's like 2 days later, and Paul has talked to Festus and Agrippa and Berenice, and they're kind of able to explain to Festus at least the parts that he needs to understand about this whole argument. And Festus says, it's too bad this guy appealed to Caesar, because if he hadn't, we could just release him. But since you've appealed to Caesar you'll go. And he sent Paul on his way. A couple of guards to, keep him in custody. Paul's entourage was there too. Luke is an eyewitness to this. He was traveling with Paul. They were on a ship. Luke tells a story of their journey, including a nor'easter. That's what they called it, the nor'easter? Well, I'm using that New England accent thing, but yeah, there was a northeaster. The northeaster hit. The ship was shipwrecked, and they were on some island. And Luke says this island was called Malta, right? Because, I guess he'd never heard of Malta before he got shipwrecked there. And there he was. And when they got on Malta, the assumption, they were gathered on the beach, and all the people who lived on Malta were kind of checking them out from kind of coming out, can we help you, dragging people out of the water. But still, there was that kind of weird, suspicious, but helpful sort of thing that happens in a disaster. And they'd started some fires. Paul was warming himself by one of the fires. He was just sitting there, and a viper, a poisonous snake, came out and bit him on the hand. I know. Paul looks at it, and he goes like this, and there's a snake hanging from his hand. And he just does this, shakes the snake off into the fire. And now everyone there, the Maltese folk, they're looking at him, and they think to themselves, well, Poseidon took a shot at him and missed, and he survived. So now some other god is going after him. This guy must be really bad that the gods themselves are going to judge him. So they're waiting for him to swell up and die, and he doesn't. And now they're a little freaked out by this because they don't know what to make of it. So finally it's Publius who decides to welcome them and to give them hospitality. And then we get the story that we're in, right? Publius welcomes them. Publius' dad is sick. Paul heals his dad. Word gets out. People from all over the island start bringing their sick to Paul. He heals them. They're really grateful. They begin to support Paul and his companions. And when it comes time for them after winter, it's 3 months goes by, that they're on Malta, and then the weather breaks and it's time for them to leave, they actually provision them for the journey. Christmas shopping season. Does it terrify you as much as it terrifies me? My wife has a solution to this problem. She actually does. It's really cool. It's not that it's less terrifying for her, but she's like, a couple weeks ago, it's almost Thanksgiving and we haven't quite finished. So, it's amazing. I think that no one would ever get a present if it was left up to me. My wife has it done, and it's done. The only thing is not wrapped. And literally, we were talking today, and she was saying, okay, so here's what we need to do. We're gonna, we're in kind of a cleaning frenzy, apparently. So we're gonna clean, and then, that does not happen often, so we got to ride the wave when it comes. And then we can wrap presents and we have to do that this week, and so that's like a whole thing. But there's most of that terrifying moment, then you walk out into the shopping world, and your credit card is exploding, and if you have children, there's whatever the latest toy is that they have to have, and you're like fighting to get it. And there's the whole Black Friday thing. I love the comparisons between Canadian Black Friday and American Black Friday. Have you ever seen those on Canadian? American Black Friday looks like a mob and they're running over each other and beating on each other. The Canadian one is everyone walks in a nice line while all of the employees clap. They're very polite. Yeah, you betcha, the Canadian way. Oh, you were the first one in line. Hey, you get the special deal. So, it's a very different thing. We've got this whole, we're going to go and get this stuff. And we like our stuff. I like my stuff. I want you to know that. I'm fond of my stuff. Don't you take my stuff from me. But this is always a very stressful time of year for people because we struggle with the realities of economy. And the realities of economy are this world is built on, the economics of this world is based on something called a zero-sum game, which boils down to this: I need to get mine because there's a limited supply and we're going to run out, and then no one's going to have, So if I don't get that last, Rainbow Tilly throw-up doll, then no one else will. So you can practice nurse. But, if I don't get it, they're going to run out. There's only a limited supply. And we don't just see that in terms of whatever the hot toy of the year is come Christmas, but, that's really how we look at the world. There's a limited supply, and I've got to get mine. And I don't necessarily need a lot. I don't need a huge pile, but I need enough. Okay, so I've got this line I'm shooting for, and I get to that line, I got to get mine because they're going to run out. Now, the thing is that if I can hit my line, then after that, I can maybe be generous. But up until that point, I've got to hit that line. And, of course, the weirdness of that is the way in which we spend money we don't have in order to attain the level of economic security that we long for. Right? You do understand how confusing that is? Right? I was listening to a TV commercial that was for some kind of credit card thing. Bad credit? No credit? No, you can get a credit card with us. Get the credit you deserve. Really? Is that how that works? The world actually is set up in such a way that there are two kind of categories of human beings in the world. It's sort of a continuum, but if you look at the extremes of the continuum, what you have is, on the one hand, you have people who are positioned in a really good place. They're super lucky that they're able to get the stuff they want. So I know this, like in my own life. When I was in college, my wife and I, we met in college, got married, been married about 6 months when she got that flu thing, where you're like sick, throwing up in the morning only for some reason. It never even occurred to us. We go to the doctor. What's going on? The doctor's like, duh. You're pregnant. What? So we were in college. We were finishing up college, and there we are. We're a family. And that first 3 months was really tough because we worked like these super part-time jobs. We had weekend jobs, right? And then suddenly she's now pregnant, so she's not working, and I'm working 24 whole hours a week. I'm a full-time college student. I'm working 24 hours a week as a security guard. So let me tell you how that paid. Yeah, minimum wage and then a penny. I don't know. It was really not a great job. It was great as a college student because actually between walking around the building, I would do my homework, which was awesome. So that part I didn't mind. But suddenly here I am in this really financial pickle. We were in the middle of this couple of months, and we had to go on food stamps because we just had no money. And as I was finishing that semester, I was, okay, I got to do something. I got to find better work. I got to somehow support my family. That's what I'm thinking to myself. And it just so happened because the place that I security guarded at, I would go 12 hours on Saturday, so 7 to 7. That means I overlapped the first and the second shifts, and they had a lot of overtime. So I kind of got to know some of the foremen a little bit, just enough. And there was one, he's like, and I was just kind of mentioned my situation. I wasn't really thinking about anything because it didn't, and he just looked at me and he said, well, we need somebody on second shift. Go talk to our HR department. So the next day, there I am in HR, and by the end of the week, I'm working there. And all of a sudden, and Wendy remembers what it was like when that first paycheck came in, and we actually had money and could actually go shopping, just with relief, how different that was. I mean, when we first had food stamps, and we could go buy food. That was like, but then to actually have money, right? Now, I worked hard, right? I worked hard. I was not the hardest worker there. His name was Marv Amundsen. I've never seen a guy who was that. This guy was amazing. It was almost like a game to him. He was, how much can I move today? And he was at the time I knew him. He was a forklift operator. We called it a tow motor. He was a tow motor operator. And that guy, his whole goal was between donuts on the forklift. He would do donuts on the forklift, but he would move more stuff. He would load up that. He was just like crazy, man. Never saw a guy who worked like that before. So if there's an 80-20 rule, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Within that 80%, there's Marv. And you're like, he's way over there. Most of the 80 is right here, and then there's Marv over there. He was a hard, amazing kind of human being, but we all worked hard. And I was in college and working, and right? But here's the thing. That job didn't just happen. I mean, it's not like I earned that job. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I was lucky enough to be in a good place to have that opportunity. It was a gift. So the thing I couldn't say about that job was, I deserve this job. Instead, I had to say, I'm grateful for this job, right? And that's the thing, that here's what we tend to do. If we're lucky enough to be in the place where we can get the resources, we tend to say, I earned my stuff, I deserve it. However, if we are in the unlucky place where those resources are out of reach, then what we say is, I deserve that too. And I should have the credit I deserve and be able to buy the stuff that I want, just like that other guy does. And that's the economy of this world. That's how the world goes. It treats everything in that way. It's a zero-sum game, and those who have think they deserve it, and those who don't have think they ought to that they deserve it too, and that it's unfair. And that's so the problem is we look at our situation and we always see ourselves somehow as needing more, wanting more, or holding on, I can't let my stuff go because then there won't be enough. I mean, we always see ourselves in those places. Paul ends up on this island of Malta as a prisoner of the Romans with fairly limited resources, and what resources they had mostly went overboard. They kind of survived just with their lives. And there they are with not a lot to offer, and they receive a blessing. Publius lets them stay at his house for a couple of days. And then there's an opportunity for Paul to produce a blessing. He can heal Publius's father-in-law, which then creates an opportunity for other people to receive that same blessing. And so they start bringing their sick, and Paul is able to extend the blessing beyond Publius's household to basically many households on the island. And as a result of that, Paul and Luke and the rest of their companions are in a position to receive a blessing from all of these grateful people. And this is actually God's economy. See, God's economy is not supposed to be the one we run. Our economy based on, I get as much as I can and hold on to mine until it runs out, that's not God's economy. God's economy goes like this. There is a blessing for you to receive, and there is a blessing for you to give. You see, if we think that way, it changes everything. We come into our lives, and instead of trying to worry about, do I have enough, we say to ourselves, wait a second, how can I bless here? Where's the blessing I can bring to this situation? And we wait to see what kinds of blessings will come our way. We don't need to grab for them because the blessing is intended for us. It's coming our way. Now, it might not be the flat screen TV you're dreaming of or the Vomit Tilly doll, whatever. Rainbow Tilly Vomit doll. Thank you. It may not be that. The blessing we receive is not always the thing we crave. It's not always the thing we're asking for, but it's the blessing we need in the moment. And when we live that way, we stop seeing it as a zero-sum game. Yeah, we still have to pay our rent and eat food and stuff, but it's no longer a zero-sum game because I'm not necessarily the beggar who walks in going, I don't have anything, can you help me? Because I might have something very important to offer. And I don't have to be the one who's always trying to grab and take and I need more, because there's a blessing intended for me, and it's coming my way. And when we live that way, when we live in that kind of faith, we start to live closer to the economy that God intends for us, both as individuals, as a community, and as humanity as a whole. Can you find now the prayer of response? So it's printed there on the 4th page. And we're going to pray that together. I see life as a game played out for dwindling resources. I grab and get and hoard and collect and accumulate so that I will have mine before it runs out. And if I am lucky enough to be positioned to succeed in the getting, I sit atop my pile and pronounce, "It's mine, I earned this." And if I am unlucky enough to be positioned out of reach, I claw and grasp in futility and pronounce, "I deserve that, I should have it too." But there is a blessing for me to give, and there is a blessing for me to receive. And in living this way, I bless and am blessed. I give and receive. I love and am loved. Lord Jesus, help me to live just such a life. Amen.
Let me walk with my brother in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the law. Let this be the law. With every step I take, let this be my sign. Let this be my vow to take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let every peace on earth and let it begin
Great, thank you so much.
Good one for the times, right?
Yes, I think.